Electioncast from the BBC.
We are in this election because of Brexit.
We don't want to be thinking about African general election. We want to be getting out and buying our Christmas presents.
If anyone comes up to you and says they know what's going to happen, cock an eyebrow, smile politely and turn your back.
Oh, guys, are we on? What, right now, live? Oh, hello, everyone. I'm Adam Fleming. You may have heard me and my colleagues on the award-winning podcast BREXITcast. Well, because there's an election on, we're now doing a daily election podcast on BBC Sounds called, imaginatively, Electioncast. And now we're bringing it to you every night on television here on the BBC News channel. And because it's a podcast, we've got microphones and headphones and people in there doing faders and pushing buttons. Today's episode is all about Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, pulling pints, and Nigel Farage, leader of the Brexit Party, pulling candidates. Don't worry, all will make sense when you listen and watch this. Welcome to your Monday edition of Electioncast. It's Adam here at Electioncast HQ, joined by...
Laura here in Westminster too.
And I think Alex Forsyth is in a pub.
In a pub, best place to be during an election.
Have you given up work already and hit the bottle?
Yeah, I didn't even go to work today. I've just spent the whole day in a pub.
And then Boris Johnson happened to walk in.
Campaign, just travel from pub to pub.
Okay.
He did. It was pure coincidence. Political correspondent, pub, Prime Minister. It's crazy.
That's amazing. I can't imagine that happening ever.
Anyway, the person we're used to seeing in a pub is the Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage.
Nice
he wasn't
segue.
in a pub for once. He was doing a press conference where he revealed his big news of the election, which is what he's not going to do.
Which is what he's not going to do. He is not going to do what he swore he absolutely would do, which is stand candidates in every single corner of the country. I have to say, having followed Nigel Farage for quite a lot of years, which Alex has done too, it's not entirely surprising that he's ended up actually changing his mind and doing a reverse ferret. But given that the Brexit Party were number one in the European elections, and then he was absolutely adamant he was going to take on all comers in the general election, it is quite a big deal that he reverse ferreted quite like this. Shall we have a listen?
I have got no great love for the Conservative Party at all. But I can see right now that by giving Boris half a chance, by keeping him honest and holding him to account, by getting people in, and by stopping the fanatics in the Liberal Democrats who'd sign us up for everything, wouldn't they? United States of Europe, European Army, you name it. I mean, they even want to revoke the result of the referendum. No, I think our action, this announcement today, prevents a second referendum from happening. And that, to me, I think right now is the single most important thing in our country. So in a sense, we now have a Leave alliance. It's just that we've done it unilaterally. We've decided ourselves that we absolutely have to put country before party and take the fight to Labour.
A unilateral Leave alliance that we've done by ourselves.
Yeah, so remember the context of this. No less than the President of the United States was helpfully alongside Nigel Farage suggesting that the Tories should do a deal. There are a couple of MPs that you talk to every now and again who say, well, yeah, maybe we could do some kind of deal behind the closed doors with Nigel Farage. But I have to say, and Alex, I don't know if you would agree with this, every time you ask anybody in the Conservative Party who has the power to make a decision or who has any kind of rank, they always say absolutely no way whatsoever would they touch the Brexit Party with a barge pole, really. So in a funny way, although we heard Nigel Farage there trying to sort of take the moral high ground in a Brexiteer kind of a way, this is also what was politically convenient for him. Alex, do you agree?
Undoubtedly, and I think he was actually coming under quite a lot of pressure from people within his own party to take this path. So but there were a handful, I mean really only a handful, kind of half a dozen or so Brexit Party candidates who pulled out last week and said they didn't want to stand against Conservatives for exactly this reason, the fear of splitting the Leave vote. But I spoke to others, and in fact I know that there were other candidates who were talking to the people close to Nigel Farage saying that we're really worried about this strategy, we are really worried about the potential consequence of standing in every seat, taking on the Tories. So that message was coming to Nigel Farage from his own party. And towards the back end of last week, some of these Brexit Party candidates, I understand, were being told to hold your nerve, stand firm, we need to keep up the pressure on the Tories, we need to push for what he calls this clean break Brexit. But they got the sense that something big was coming around it. So like you say, Laura, I don't think there's any great surprise in what he's done. I think it was almost an inevitability that he would get to this point. And what he's trying to do, as you say, is make it, look at me, I'm putting, country before party, I'm pulling back. But there was no chance from the Tory side of a pact, and he was getting a lot of grief from some of his own about the possible consequences of going down that route of 600 seats.
And just to be clear, this pact that isn't a pact, that's one-sided, is Nigel Farage saying he will not stand in the 317 seats that the Tories won the last time, but he'll focus his fire, as he puts it, on the Remainer parties and or Labour.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So they've gone from making a promise that there would be this national party standing everywhere to saying basically they're going to stand in roughly 50% of the seats. And that is where we have to wonder what the impact of this might be. So
I know somebody who might know.
Oh, who's that?
Our Brainbox Peter Barnes from the Analysis and Research Department here at the BBC at Westminster, who sent us all an email spelling this out. And here's what he said in his email.
The fact that the Brexit Party is standing aside in Conservative-held seats doesn't really help Boris Johnson to win a majority. On average, you'd expect it to mean that the Conservatives will keep a small number of seats that they would otherwise have lost. It's difficult to say which those seats would be or how many, but it shouldn't be lots unless the Conservatives do much worse than the current polls suggest. The main point, though, is that the Tories need gains for a majority, not just the seats they already have. And most of those will come from Labour-held seats. So if there are still Brexit Party candidates standing in those places, it probably matters more. One other small point, it's obviously natural on this issue to want to focus on strongly pro-Brexit areas, but the truth is that it could also affect Remain areas. For example, the Conservatives' top Labour-held target is Kensington. It's a very strong Remain area, but it will still be harder for the Conservatives to take if a few hundred people there vote for the Brexit Party.
And the next email I got after that was about the GDP figures and then an invitation to a concert.
Oh, a nice concert?
Yes. Yeah, I'm busy that night, so it was nice to get the invitation.
But just in broad terms, as somebody in the Tory campaign headquarters put it to me, it is obviously helpful, but to win a majority, they need seats where the Brexit Party are still standing, and it's very hard to work out what the possible implications of that might be. And a rather more pointed text from somebody who may or may not be a very senior member of the Conservative Party. It says, so Farage accepts a vote for the Brexit Party is voting for Corbyn in a second referendum, but he hasn't pulled out of the seats that we need to win to make sure that we beat him. So it helps a bit, but it doesn't, it's not, it is an important event in this election. And it will change the dynamics in maybe quite a lot of seats in ways that are hard to predict. But it is not by no means does this suddenly make a Tory majority any kind of slam dunk.
And Alex, you were with the Prime Minister this morning. Did he raise a glass to this news?
Yeah. Well, as Dora said, I don't think he's going to be disappointed because in those seats that the Conservatives already hold, it obviously makes it a bit of an easier task for them to hold them. He was asked, did you do a quiet deal? Have you been chatting to Mr Farage? And as you might expect, it was a categorical, absolutely not, no way. They don't want any kind of part of being seen to be some sort of pact with the Brexit Party for fear of the impact that might have on Tory voters. But it's also worth saying within the Brexit Party, there was a bit of worry at Mr Farage presenting this as a kind of we're going to go out and attack Labour because obviously the implication may be that if they are being seen to help the Tories, that might alienate some traditional Labour voters who might have otherwise been considering voting for the Brexit Party. If they think that Mr Farage is just helping out Boris Johnson to get in to power, then that might just put a bit of a nasty taste in their mouths. So I think there was some candidates who were saying to me, we would have preferred it if Mr Farage had presented this as we are out to target Remainers as opposed to we're out to target Labour seats.
It's interesting, and it took about 5 minutes flat before before, Nicola Sturgeon, Keir Starmer, Jeremy Corbyn, and all sorts of other people were all over the place on social media saying, see, look, this means that Boris Johnson is basically exactly the same as Nigel Farage, and also it's like a club with Donald Trump too. In fact, I think Jeremy Corbyn said something like, this is a Trump alliance which would bring us Thatcherism on steroids. So it's helpful and in a way, and it also means that Nigel Farage has a different role in the air war, right? Because he's not going to be standing up slagging off Boris Johnson every day. But it does also give more ammo to the people on the other side who want to say, well, Boris Johnson's just a really posh version of Nigel Farage.
Oh, and what is Nigel Farage's rationale for switching from this deal that Boris Johnson has done with the EU is dreadful, it's worse than remaining, to now like, oh, actually, it's fine?
I think it's partly all the reasons that Alex was talking about, that nervousness among candidates and the kind of, oh, do we really want to be seen to be on the other side to Brexit? One might actually say getting Brexit done. But I think also because this election looks strange and unpredictable, and it might be very, very tight. And if there is Labour being the biggest party, or maybe getting a majority, or the biggest party alongside the SNP and others, then there would be another referendum. And if there's another referendum, then Brexit might not happen at all.
Although interesting to listening to Nigel Farage, his kind of rationale for the slight U-turn he's made was that because Boris Johnson said we will not extend the transition period beyond the end of 2020, which is a transition period in the Brexit deal, and also that the future relationship, the trade deal, will be super Canada plus minus plus.
Yes. Well, I would posit that basing a big political decision on something that was posted on social media quite late at night on the 10th of November might be not quite part of the whole, well, part of the story, maybe not the whole story.
Okay. Alex?
And you have to think, I mean, he was in Nigel Farage was in Wales on Friday night, and he was giving one of these big rally speeches, and it was really interesting that there was a very, very slight but noticeable difference in his rhetoric on Friday, because up until that point he'd been going, you've got to ditch your deal if you want a pact, Mr Johnson. On Friday there was this really slight softening, and he was actually going, you've just got to promise not to extend beyond next year, we've got to sort this out next year. So it was almost like he was moving towards that position anyway, because there was this sort of sense of pressure building up. And it's also worth noting that he enjoyed massive success with the Brexit party, Nigel Farage, when Theresa May was leading the Tories, and there were a lot of people who didn't like her approach to Brexit. Now, I think he gets the sense that perhaps some of those people that really flocked to him at that point are slightly more convinced by Boris Johnson's offering. So he would have been doing some calculations of his own, of course, because, you know, if he didn't want to put up 600 candidates and then have a not a brilliant result in this election, I mean, of course, we don't know what's going to happen, but I think there was this sense, you know, the real kind of thrust of support behind the Brexit party came a little bit earlier this year.
Alex, did I hear a glass smash behind you? Is there like a pub brawl happening?
No, there would never be a glass smash in this pub because it's just too well run. It's the Lichgate Tavern, and we love it because, you know, they set us up in here. It's freezing outside, and they let us come in here and sit in the warm and have our drink here. But I can say that this is the very bar that Boris Johnson was standing behind, pouring the obligatory politician on the campaign trail pint a little earlier.
There you go.
He did do it, had a little tiny sip, said, oh, I'm not meant to drink before Brexit gets done, but he did have a little sip, I noticed.
Did he pour a good pint? Because that's always one of the tests in elections, isn't it? Who can actually pour a pint?
You know, I have had some secret conversations with the owners, the very kind owners of this pub, and they have given me their verdict on Boris Johnson's pint, but I don't know if I'm allowed to share. I don't know if they'll get cross with me if I tell you. But you know.
Well, you don't want to burn your sources. Oh, really? It was not that good.
Well, I think we're still in the pub. They might kick me out if I say something wrong.
I think we're going to hear that a lot. The same happened in there was a distillery tour where the obligatory, oh, look, I'm in Scotland, I'm a politician, I must have a little sip. And he made the same gag, oh, no, I'm not allowed. There's meant to be a self-imposed booze ban for the Prime Minister during the election. So I think we're going to hear that gag
over and over. It's not like Boris Johnson to repeat a gag over and over.
Oh, joy.
Laura, very quickly, Liberal Democrats today in court.
Yes.
Why were they in court?
So they're very, 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 very cross about Jo Swinson, who's presenting herself as a candidate to be the Prime Minister, not being included in the head-to-head prime ministerial debates. And the Lib Dems have done what we thought they probably would do, which is apply for a judicial review of the decision. And for people who followed the sort of travails of the TV debates over the years since 2010, when they sort of became quite a big, you know, media fixation and a political fixation, you know, discuss whether that's right or wrong. Some people love them, some people think they're pointless, so I make no judgment. I think they're obviously important because people get a chance to hear from politicians. But anyway, frankly, it works either way for the Lib Dems. So either they get a story about saying, look, we're getting frozen out, we deserve a chance to have a Prime Minister, this is a terrible disgrace, so they can keep the story rumbling and they can keep relevant, which is always a battle for the not, if you're not one of the big two parties. Or if they win it, and then they end up getting to take part in the debate, which of course they'd be delighted about.
So win-win for them.
Yeah.
In a minute, we're going to talk about the big stooshy that there's been about public spending and who's spending how many trillions where. A big thought about what that reveals, the fact that we've had that row.
It reveals that this election genuinely does turn the page from the last two elections, when the core disagreement was between Labour and the Tories was over, who's most careful with the chequebook. That said, although the Tories are now promising to turn on spending taps in a way that, would bring Philip Hammond out in hives, let alone George Osborne, it's very important for election casters and everybody listening and watching also to understand the two parties are presenting radically different visions of the economy. Yes, they're both promising a lot more spending. But if you compare, their plans for Labour want to renationalise lots of water companies, rail companies, they're still looking at things in a radically different way. So you'd be wrong to think, they're now all spending loads. It's all the same. Really, really not.
It's not just about the numbers. No. It's about why
and
the numbers are.
That's right. And the numbers themselves are also very, very different,
Okay, right, Laura,
right,
you've got to go.
Thanks.
Alex,
nice to chat to you.
It's cocktail hour now, I think. So Alex is going to move from the beers to the cocktails. Thanks for joining us from the pub.
I'm already halfway through a few. Yeah. Pleasure.
You pulled it off very well. Right, Chris Morris of Reality Check. Are you there?
I'm here, Adam. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
No afternoon drinking for you.
No, afraid not. No cocktails here.
So Reality Check is our fact-checking service here at the BBC. And the reality you've been checking for the last couple of days, I suppose, actually, because it was a story over the weekend as well, spending pledges and who's got trillions to spend or not.
Yeah, this figure the Tories came out with over the weekend that Labour's spending pledges were going to cost £1.2 trillion. And it is basically a bit of a back of a fag packet calculation. I mean, granted, the document in which sets it out is more than 30 pages long, so it's quite a big fag packet. But nevertheless, what they've done is costed the last Labour manifesto from 2017 about £600 billion. And then they've added up all the pledges Labour has made since, notably at its recent party conference, about another £600 billion. You add 600 and 600 and you get 1.2 trillion. There's a few problems with that. Number one, we don't know what's going to be in the next Labour manifesto, and we can talk about manifestos in a minute, Adam, because I've got some top stats for you on that.
Oh, good, okay.
But also some of the assumptions it makes. For example, it says renationalisation. Labour's plans would cost about 196 billion quid. And those are numbers they've got from the CBI. The problem with that number, we've looked at it, and many of the numbers they use are about 30% above current market value for companies they may want to renationalise. And also, if you take, for example, I don't know, a water company, they're using, say, 3 billion it's going to cost to buy that water company, but they haven't then added in the fact that once they buy it, people like you and me are still going to be paying water bills, so that asset is going to create some value as well. So we're not convinced that 1.2 trillion is a particularly useful number. Is Labour going to be spending a lot of money, certainly a lot more money than the last 10 years of austerity? Yes, it is for sure. But as Laura said earlier, everyone's promising to spend more money, but they're going to spend it in a slightly different way.
And so just from my own sanity, 1.2 trillion is 1,200 billion.
It's got lots of zeros on it, yes. It's a lot of... Put it this way, roughly over a 5-year cycle of a parliament, we spend at the moment about 4 trillion quid. So this would be saying add 1.2 trillion on top of that, so a more than 25% increase in overall public spending. Until we see the manifesto, when's it coming out? We can't actually accurately cost everything they're going to do.
The one that jumped out for me when I first skimmed through it was the idea of bringing private schools and independent schools into the state system. And there you got, for example...
35 billion quid.
Yeah, but that's something that was voted on at Labour conference, but we don't know to what extent that will appear in the manifesto. And also the Conservatives were suggesting that would happen on day one of a new Labour government, so like 14th of December this year. So there's just one example of where it's just not not quite accurate, we might say.
Yeah, no, it's front-loading all the pledges and putting them all into day one, saying suddenly they're going to be wanting to spend this much. Of course, the Tories don't have a monopoly on perhaps exaggerating some figures for their opponents. We can, I'm sure you've talked about it over the last few days, the £500 million a week that Labour says a Tory trade deal with Donald Trump would cost after Brexit. That number also we don't think stands up to scrutiny because it's based on assumptions that suddenly all UK drugs would cost the same as drugs in the United States.
And I saw over the weekend somebody had done a GIF of John McDonnell throwing the money out at the palm of his hand with Jeremy Corbyn wearing his Thug Life glasses in the background. And people made the point, well, actually, maybe Labour wouldn't be too upset by that GIF because actually their whole thing is that they're going to invest loads more money than the Tories will. So actually, maybe this, you could argue, might backfire on the Conservatives because it just reinforces Labour's message about how much they want to invest.
Yeah, they're not shy about saying they want to invest more money. Their whole shtick is, look, we haven't been investing enough money for years. And one thing we can say with certain of this election is, the money tree, magic or otherwise, is in full bloom. There's no question about that.
You teased me a couple of minutes ago about the fact about when the manifestos might appear, because I'm desperate to see some stuff actually written down that we ourselves can then cost and work
it out. It does
out.
help, doesn't it? So what we did, there's been rumours around that maybe the Tory manifesto might come out quite late. So we thought, let's go back over the last few elections and see when normally do these manifestos come out. So over the last 10 elections going back to 1979, the average number of days that before the election the Tory manifesto has come out, drum roll, 23.7. The average number of days for the Labour manifesto, 24. So 3 and a bit weeks for both of them, which would mean in theory we should be seeing manifestos at the beginning of next week. The Lib Dems about the same, 22 days. The only outrider we could find was the SNP at the last election, 2017. Their manifesto only came out 9 days before the election, and I guess that's probably because at the previous election in 2015 they did so well, 56 out of 59 seats, they probably wanted to assume that nothing was going to change for as long as possible. But on average, just over 3 weeks. So if that is upheld, we should be seeing some numbers we can really get our teeth into at the beginning of next week. But there have been these rumours around, who knows, that the Tory manifesto might be a little bit delayed.
This is what I love about you guys at Reality Check, though. You've worked out that the Tory average is 23.7 days, which means it's sort of, we expect it to come out mid-morning.
You're trying to work out which hour of the day it's going to come out now.
Yeah,
I know.
Is that mid-morning or mid-afternoon? What's 0.7 of a day?
0.7 of a day. I'll go back to my boffins and we'll work it out for you.
And I'm now joined by precisely 1.0 Chris Masons. That's just one.
That's the kind of nerdery I like.
Yeah, political correspondent Chris Mason here with us for the last couple of minutes. So, talk to me about Cobra. And I don't mean there's a big snake loose in Westminster.
Yes, this is the government's Civil Contingencies Committee for Emergencies, gathering tomorrow, we hear, from Downing Street tonight, with the Prime Minister chairing it. This in response to the floods that we've seen in South Yorkshire and in the Midlands. There's been plenty of action, hasn't there, from the other political parties saying, is the government doing enough?
Well, like a letter from Jeremy Corbyn urging there to be a Cobra.
Exactly, and now there is a Cobra. And so a Prime Minister, as any Prime Minister can do in a general election campaign, is try and do, look Prime Ministerial when stuff happens. And I guess this is an example of that.
Nick Bowles, remind us who he is and what he's got to say tonight.
So he is a former Conservative minister, has been the MP for Stamford in Lincolnshire. He has not been a fan of Boris Johnson for some time, but he's written a piece in the London Evening Standard. I'll just read you one paragraph, which kind of gets you there. In the blue corner, talking about the Conservatives, we have a compulsive liar who has betrayed every single person he has ever had any dealings with, every woman who has ever loved him, every member of his family, every friend, every colleague, every employee, every constituent. And he's talking about the Prime Minister. He goes on to be not too complimentary about Labour either, and then says he'll be voting Liberal Democrat. So we we had Ian Austin and doing his thing last week, the former Labour minister who said he would vote Conservative. Oh, whoops, sorry. My WhatsApp's going off.
Someone texting you now?
It's an old school friend saying, your tie, it's a bit loose.
I thought it was going to be a political party with a big scoop for tomorrow, because you're on the late shift. So
hello, Tim.
Because you're on the late shift, which means you're preparing content for tomorrow morning's radio bulletins and TV.
That's why my tie's undone, because the late shift, I'm reunited with my good friend 1am.
Yeah.
So what happens at this stage is all the political parties start sending stuff through that they hope we're going to broadcast tomorrow morning with their various claims and counterclaims. And if a party says, oh, we're going to cut income tax or raise income tax, whatever, that's fair enough. That's straightforward. You just write it. When they start making accusations about each other and the other side is contesting that accusation, particularly in this pre-manifesto stage when all of the big parties can say, oh, we're not quite sure what our platform will be, it gets quite knotty. And that's my evening ahead.
Good luck. Chris will be here probably till 1 or 2, maybe even 3 a.m. Hopefully it's more 1 or 2 rather than 3. Thank you very much for joining us for the first TV election cast. Remember, you can listen to the original podcast on BBC Sounds. You can listen to old episodes if you want. And remember, there is tons and tons of amazing BBC content about the election here on the news channel, on the BBC website, wherever you consume the BBC. There will be good stuff about the election. And I'll be back tomorrow night. Thanks for joining us.